afternoon, everybody. I'm Josh Welsh, president of Film Independent. I want to welcome you to a very special edition of Film Independent Presents. I'm thrilled to be here in conversation with filmmaker Ron Howard about his powerful new documentary, Rebuilding Paradise, which, if you're watching this, I have a strong suspicion you've just watched. Before we get into the conversation, I want to thank our lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Thank you to everyone at the HFPA for making this entire program possible. I want to thank our screening partner, Vision Media, and I want to thank our media partner, the Los Angeles Times. Thank you to all of you for supporting Film Independent and this program. And for anyone watching who's not familiar with Film Independent, go to our website, filmindependent.org, check us out, and please join, become a member. We do robust year-round programming to build the audience for great filmmaking and also to support the next generation of diverse and original voices. So with that, Ron, thank you so much for being here today, and congratulations on this amazing and powerful film.
Thank you. A pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
I mean, to start at the beginning, it's obvious from the film that you started filming very quickly after the fires. And I just want to ask, how did it come to you, the decision to make this film?
Well, initially, my instinct about it was just fueled simply by the fact that I knew the town of Paradise. My mother-in-law had lived there for the last 4 years of her life. I'd been there many times. I have a lot of very close in-laws in Redding, California, which is about an hour and a half away. They'd just been through a horrible fire, and then suddenly Paradise is devastated. And I couldn't help but wonder what these people who sort of paragons of self-reliance and independence. I mean, it's a little town. It's not a tourist attraction. It's not, it's not a industrial hub. People just live there because, by God, that's where they want to be, and it's sort of, and it has this incredible spirit. And I just wondered what it was going to mean to them to navigate the aftermath of something like this. Not so much the crisis itself, but what would it mean? And initially I thought of rebuilding Paradise, but I actually thought it might have to have a question mark on it because I didn't know if it was possible.
Yeah.
And the NatGeo team supported me right away. At Imagine Entertainment, we have a really active documentary group now. So Brian Grazer and I are just so proud of what Justin Wilkes and Sarah Bernstein are doing, the filmmakers we're working on, the range of stories. We just made an investment in Alex Gibney's company, Jigsaw. I mean, the volume of great work that's going on coming out of there is fantastic. So I went to them and I said, is this something to approach? What should we do? And they said, how fast can you get there? Which was their answer. Go explore it. You won't know until you get there.
Yeah.
And it was powerful. It was devastating. We began to meet people. We began to understand, sort of just what they were going through. And fortunately, NatGeo was willing to support the idea of basically being there for a year. And understanding what that first year after the news cameras leave, after it's not a immediate life-death crisis, then what? And that was really the purpose, was to that sort of case study.
So that's really interesting to hear that you were thinking of it from the beginning of like the year following that year after. But I do want to start at the beginning of the film. I watched it twice in a row because I don't know how many minutes this is. Like the first 7 minutes or 10 minutes, it's like a master class in visual storytelling where you capture what was the day like of that first day of the fire. And it's the most harrowing thing to watch, where it starts off, it's this beautiful sunny day, and then you hear like a little chatter. There might be some smoke or there's a fire, but no big deal. And by the end of those 7 minutes, you, the viewer, are created entirely out of cell phone camera, radio broadcast, police dashboard cam, thing like that. It's found footage where you just create that, how fast the fire went. And it's terrifying and electrifying filmmaking.
Thank you. Well, it's the most harrowing sequence I've ever been involved in, and I made backdraft, but you can't stage this stuff. and it was a real gift. We had no idea we'd begin the film that way, in this sort of Saving Private Ryan, Omaha Beach kind of drop the audience into it. But our, as people wanted to share this footage with us from the first day I was there, I was looking at body cam footage. Wow. And looking at footage that people had on their phones. And, I'd seen that used well in other films, great documentaries about Katrina. It had elements of that where it was used. And so I thought, well, maybe similarly, we'll put, in a kind of, we'll smatter it around here and there just to create context if people are willing to share it. So we asked, put it on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Well, we were flooded with so much. And as we put it into the bucket to sort of build out that sort of you are there first person bucket of possibilities, it immediately just screamed at us that this was the way to start the film, because it was riveting, it was emotional, and it did resonate. So that from that point forward, as we began to demonstrate this fallout and dramatize it in intimate, personal ways, that you wouldn't forget it. Once in a while, we did go back and remind audiences of what some characters had been through. But first and foremost, it was just drop audiences into it and begin to then create empathy, which again was a major goal of the film.
Yeah, even in that first sequence, the character really comes through, because even if you're not seeing the face of the person talking, there were these snippets where I remember one, I think it's the guy, you see someone's hand holding a garden hose, spraying Inferno, and then he goes, he says to his wife, "Time to abandon ship," and you just get like what it would be like to be that guy in that.
And as a guy who's spent his career, he's first acting and then directing actors, it was very revealing to me, because there wasn't that much melodrama in the voice until there was. Right. And then it was this unbelievable raw emotion. And it was very interesting to see that there's almost like no in between. And it was people being kind of almost preternaturally calm. And then all of a sudden, you just could hear it. You could just hear it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that would affect anyone watching the film, but speaking as someone who lives in California, in Southern California, when I was watching that, when you have someone sitting there in their car saying something about how they're worried that the window's going to melt.
Yeah.
Very cool. Or not.
I mean, the whole purpose for me was just to put again, in this sort of attempt to create empathy. And I do this in my scripted movies. I always have, especially the movies based on real events. Going back to Apollo 13 or Frost Nixon or Rush, whatever is to not put these subjects and these individuals on pedestals, but just basically say, if you were right alongside them, if you were living alongside these people, what would it feel like? How would it feel like to go through what they went through? And so certainly that was an aim here. But again, yes. Grab people with that immediacy and yeah, absolutely. But then what? And I think what the people who let us follow them really offered us was a real insight into what you need, to come through something like that. What can society offer you? What do you have to find within yourself? What can your loved ones give you? What can they not give you? And how do you navigate that long tail of suffering? So in a way, it's kind of a story of coping with a brand of PTSD, and what you can expect of others around you, including your government.
Right. Yeah. So after that initial sequence, when you get into the rebuilding and following a group of characters through that year, I mean, to me, it just struck me. I mean, this is beautiful humanistic filmmaking where you don't have talking heads explaining the issues. It's not a overtly political approach or anything like that. It's focused on identifying this core group of, I'll call them characters that you follow through that year. Yeah. And I'm just curious how what that process was like, how you identified them, how you built those relationships. I'm sure there were probably other people you were initially maybe,
Oh yeah.
and
Well, there were yes. So we cast the net wide, and in my mind, applying like with the Beatles, we were talking a little bit before the Beatles documentary. I always assign a movie that has meant a lot to me, a scripted movie that's meant a lot to me. So I can sort of I don't know. It just helps me, given my background, to do that. With the Beatles documentary, weirdly, I kept thinking of the movie Das Boot. And because I felt like these guys were the collective, they were a team, but they were in this bubble, and they couldn't really know exactly everything that was going on out there, but some of it was kind of threatening, and they knew where they were trying to go. So anyway, I began to think of this as Thornton Wilder's Our Town. And I thought, if we could follow enough individuals from enough different kind of corners of this town, that would be interesting. So let's start reaching out, and we did. Zan Parker and Liz Morheim, the producers, were great at getting that Facebook page going, keeping the phone calls. They were trusting of me when I would say, we're not really here for the immediate pain of sort of what you're doing today. We want to know about that, but we want to also know what you're going to be doing 6 months from now and a year from now. And we want to understand this town. My mother-in-law lived here. I've been here. And they seemed to find us kind of cathartic, which was great. But slowly but surely, we began following the people who were really showing up at the events. And this was a takeaway for me was show up. You want to heal? You want to maintain hope? Keep showing up. The memorial service, the Christmas tree lighting, Gold Nugget days, the town meeting. Some of it's painful, but the people who cared enough, who were hanging on to that hope enough to actually be there. Well, we began to find them in those scenes and keep following them and catching up with them and getting updates. And many of them became our principal characters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an amazing group of people. I mean, but I have to say, I found them and the film both deeply inspiring, where there's this spirit of resilience and strength in these people. And also profoundly sad because of what they're going through. And you don't sugarcoat what happens to them over that year, where there's death, there's divorce, there's right. And it's not like they just triumph over this thing and the rebuild is easy. You see how many people move away, and
there were people that we were excited about following who evaporated. And there were kids who we just realized, no, we're invading a family situation here, that this is not fair anymore, and they were younger. So there were all of these sort of twists and turns in terms of kind of the stories that we were following. But I was very grateful for people who did allow us, having been with us, allowed us into their lives, allowed us to keep going, even when what they were facing was incredibly painful and intimate, and so I really, I so appreciated it. But I think they began to recognize that there was something to offer here, because they kept saying in various ways, you never know until you live through it. And I think they recognized that all we were trying to do is let people understand that, live through it a little through you, so it goes beyond the 6 o'clock news, and that's graphic and shocking, but everybody, most of us go on with our lives, and we assume those people do too. Not quite so simple.
One of the most powerful storylines for me was I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who ran the school board,
Michelle Johnson. Michelle Johns. Sorry,
Michelle Johns. I mean, she's determined. You see the devastation of the school district and how many schools were destroyed, and she is determined to rebuild and to figure out a way to do the high school graduation. it really is like Apollo 13 level, like how it's not going to happen.
We none of us thought, the kids didn't think it was going to happen. I mean, we interviewed him. You hear them say, we never thought this could happen. She never gave up. What a hero, you know. And she's a wonderful woman. I don't think that's how she lives her life, looking for opportunities to be heroic.
Right.
I just think she was there, and she's very determined, very intelligent, and very passionate. And, you know, she retired after that. I mean, it's, however, she just bought a lot back in Paradise. So she moved after it was over, and she's just bought a lot. So there's a part of her that is incredibly hopeful. She's still in touch with what's going on. And in fact, I think thanks largely to what she accomplished, the first really important civic building projects are the schools, and they're really building them state of the art. And their hope is that that's going to become a magnet for parents, for young parents who want to raise their kids in a place they can afford, but that has great schools.
So one thing I thought was so interesting is you let characters raise within the film. I call them characters, but they're subjects in the film who raise the question. I think it's in a city council meeting or something. Somebody says, "Should we be rebuilding?"
Yeah.
And someone else in the film, someone else who lives there, answers it. So that conversation happens internal to the film. But I'm just curious, as opposed to having some expert weigh in with a talking head saying, you know, this is danger and all that. But just, I'm curious, like, for you, you're sort of, is that something you grappled with in looking at this, not just about Paradise, but in general, like, especially in 2020, you know, you look at the.
Well, I mean, there are so many threats, and underneath all of this, of course, is global warming.
Right.
And while, you know, again, this is not a polemic, as you said correctly, going into this, it certainly comes up, and it's certainly a factor. Didn't want to see it politicized in this film, but the world is changing, and the film does make a point. It was very important to me to just recognize that, okay, this movie happens to be about a horrible fire, but look at what's going on around the world, and this is what displaced people look like. And these are not the most disadvantaged of displaced people, but my God, what a slippery slope. Yeah. You know, even for these folks, which is sort of, there's sort of a subtext to me, because again, these are these tough pioneer spirit, these, you know, this is rugged Americans. Yeah. And it's a slippery slope even for those folks, which, you know, I hope Briggs again builds that bridge of empathy to people who really do see themselves in these folks, and recognize, you know, what it means to have to turn and look to you know, a government agency or charity or your neighbor. It's you know, it's a struggle. I was shocked, however, by the various roadblocks by very well-meaning people. By the way, FEMA, Red Cross, agents that I spoke to, they you know, they want to help. They get it. They're not callous, but there are limitations. There are tremendous limitations beyond their control, but they're not beyond everybody's control. And one of the disappointments for Michelle's husband, and we never got this on camera, so we couldn't really include it in the film, but part of the despair that he felt after the fire was that he'd been on the fire safety council, and he knew that there were other steps and that they never were able to convince the town to take that could have saved many, many lives and a lot of the damage. And so there, you know, I think this does beg that question of, you know, what is prevention worth?
Right. Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, in that context, the elements dealing with PG&E and their responsibility. I mean, clearly there was a specific responsibility that they had here, but it's also much broader.
Much broader. I mean, yes, they were culpable, and that kind of, that, you know, that's those sort of practices, you know, need to be called to account, and they were, but these recent fires of this year that dwarfed the nightmare of the Paradise Fire. Were started by other things, the lightning or fireworks or who knows what, and so the fact is we are more vulnerable, which gets back to your earlier question. I mean, as was answered in that city council meeting, well, where do you draw that line? Mm-hmm. Because what about earthquakes in California? What about tornadoes? What about, how do you guard against all this? So to me, the point is, to live where you want to live, but really, really understand those risks. And as a community, really think about investing more in prevention. And there are a lot of strategies to prevent fires and other kinds of damage.
It was amazing. Towards the end of the film, you have that sequence where you show a controlled burn, to get rid of sort of the undergrowth. That was amazing. I'd never seen that before.
I hadn't either. It was really, really interesting. And the Native American guy, whose name I happen to be forgetting right now, is a really cool guy. But he said, well, our people have been doing this for hundreds of years, thousands of years. But yeah, absolutely. There are strategies, and some of them are more expensive and than others. And sometimes it boils down to, a lot of people I don't want the town telling me how many trees I can have on my lot. Mm-hmm. I don't want to pay to rake this up and clean this out. It's stuff any of us might say. Not just the Paradisians, any of us might say, but I think we have to look at our environment now and understand where the threats are coming from. Look, global warming arguably has something to do with COVID. So I do think it gets back to listening to science and really, really understanding what the options are and not hiding from them, because they're kind of not what you want to hear right now, not what you want to face. I don't want to be inconvenienced.
Right. Well, I appreciated the way the film was not, overtly political, or you didn't politicize the issues in any obvious way. But I'd say I was very happy. You have one shot when Trump comes to visit, which is just so tough. Where he can't even get the name of the town.
Yeah, yeah.
Pleasure, which is just, it's so obscene. Like,
I know it.
Just show that.
Well, look, he's a performer and he flubbed his line, so he, but that was all, so very well-meaning politicians, again, they show up, right, and some of them say the right things, some of them say the wrong things, but it really is about action. As Ben Franklin coined the phrase, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." Mm-hmm. And he was actually talking about fires that were raging in Philadelphia at that time. So, I keep getting back to that, but because again, there is this, there is a social contract, which also has to do with preserving people's dignity, their children's mental health. And you saw that under such attack's sort of the wrong word, because nobody's doing it intentionally, but the system is fraught with this undercurrent, this vibe, like, we're not sure we believe you, prove your damage. Of course you got to do all this stuff. Thankfully I'm not the one who has to sort out the policies, but this is what I witnessed, and I really wanted to share this because it's shattering. Everybody's definition of what a productive day is completely turned on its head. You can imagine. Suddenly it's about going and standing in line for X number of hours to qualify for this, but, to communicate that. There were so many people, and this is a kind of heartbreaking. There were so many people who just disappeared because they didn't even really know how to deal with the forms they had to fill out, and there was nobody there to really say, this agency really can help you, but let me get you through this paperwork. Well, there are just lots of things that I hope the film highlights, And perhaps people smarter than I am can begin to search for some problems. I know Woody, who was the ex-mayor, who managed to be the third guy to start to rebuild his house. What a guy! Very interesting. He had been to town drunk, and he's a really proactive guy. And I think he's going to run for the council again. I think he definitely wants to stay, and he definitely believes things can be better, things can be safer, and people can still live there in a really responsible way. That's his plan.
So when you made this film, obviously, you couldn't have anticipated what the world would be like right now. And I'm not even talking about COVID. I'm talking actually just the fires of 2020 were so epic. Yeah. And the entire West Coast is burning in a way that we haven't seen before. And it feels like every year they're getting worse and worse.
Well, the firefighters who we interviewed, and who knows what their politics are, but they were fully aware that things were different. Climate change had shifted things. That they never had to deal with fires as a real threat. After Halloween, as they would say, and and here it was. There was just so much fuel on the ground, as they would put it, on November 8th, that it was the firestorm of all firestorms. And you can't keep saying they're just one fluke after another. Right. And so it's a new normal and it's not just fires. So we want to live through this, and we want to live where we want to live. How can we help one another with it? And what do we need? What do we need to invest in? What do we need to believe in? Who do we need to listen to? And what do we need to talk about? Here's one thing I loved that I thought was pretty fascinating as it unfolded, and wouldn't have necessarily anticipated this. Oh, they gave us a great lesson in problem solving. They didn't politicize their circumstance, and those are not all like-minded individuals, I can tell you. I mean, I've hung around with them enough to know, and yet they could identify an issue, and they could agree to solve it, and they did, and they moved mountains. They really, really did, by putting that stuff aside and saying, okay, but we can agree on this, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we as a society demanded a little bit more of that from our elected officials and our council groups and so forth, and they it shouldn't have to be in such dire moments that kind of problem solving comes into play.
Absolutely, yeah, that really comes through in the film beautifully. I thought that. I mean, again, it's funny, I wasn't thinking about that much when I watched it, but that city council scene, I'm sure you had people there with very different political views. I mean, I almost felt bad on some level for the guy from PG&E, like the way he stood up in front of that room and apologized, and then someone says, what about the 89 people who died who can't be here to hear you? And the screaming, or the obvious polarized voices that you might expect. Like, people were really trying to figure it out.
Well, it's not a movie with singular bad guys. It's not about that. But it is about coping. And I found a lot of inspiration in it. I mean, even from the first days, I'd never been, it's my first verite documentary. I've never worked on a film where you don't really know more or less what the story is going to be, and until you start telling it. Even my documentaries, Beatles 8 Days a Week, or the Pavarotti. Some stuff I've done for NatGeo or Made in America, the Jay-Z documentary, more or less knew where we were going.
Right.
Here's a situation where you get there, it's a town you've been in, it's flattened, pictures can never do it justice, not even ours. I mean, it's when you can, every sense is employed in understanding and grasping this devastation, and then you see it in people's eyes. But you also do see this resilience and this commitment. Now, the cycles of grief was something that we identified early on as a natural structure for our film. There's a chart, there's a graph, which is all about, that initial energy of, yeah, we're going to make it. Yes, we can cope. It's a tragedy, but we'll be all right. And then, it starts to go down, it goes back up, it collapses again. And we saw it. We saw it play out during the course of that year. And they're not out of it. They're not all the way back to the time, they all still feel it. When they watched the movie, oh my God, it was painful to sit with them because they
screening in Paradise.
I wasn't able to be at that screening, but we did have a screening at Sundance where a lot of the principal individuals were there, and then I had conversations, with people right after they saw it, and it was cathartic, but devastating in many ways. They were living through it again in ways, as you can imagine, and when they talk about it, and you talk about where they are today, they're making a lot of headway, but I'm not sure you ever get over something like that.
It's interesting hearing you describe the cycle of grief. I feel like nationally, well, globally, we're living through that right now with COVID, where it's this slow moving.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, it's COVID, but it's been going on for a while. I think we're going through a revolution. It's a technological revolution. Humankind has experienced this before, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or the Renaissance, and we recognize the growth that came out of those situations, but you have to dig a little deeper to read about the pain and suffering that went along with it. Right. And I felt for a while we're kind of there, and then all of a sudden, this, which seems to put everything into a kind of relief, into broad relief.
So hearing you talking about that makes me want to ask, stepping back from the Rebuilding Paradise, or going a bit broader, in the last few years, you've been doing such remarkable documentaries and on such a wide range of topics, and you mentioned Pavarotti and the Beatles and this one, and then, also executive producing lots of other great docs. You as a filmmaker, you strike me as so just curious about different things, and your narrative fiction stuff is comedic and dramatic and like a wide range of tones and everything. What's a documentary these days?
Well, it is that. I mean, if I hadn't been able to have a career as a director or remain in the business, I was a child actor, and so there's always a question mark around what will the future really be. By the time I was in high school, I knew that I would be either a journalist or a history teacher. And if I was a history teacher, I thought maybe I might, coach baseball also or something. But I've always had that. Then it took a long time before I began working on movies based on real events, because I thought it would be creatively limiting, and I found it was exactly the opposite. And it sort of reawakened this excitement I always had for history and that sort of journalistic curiosity. Yeah. And then it took a number of years, while I've always loved documentaries and watched them, but in kind of awe, and was always tentative about getting into them. Well, as my children grew and left the house, and I was beginning to seek a little more kind of adventure in my life beyond doing scripted work, which I still love, I realized that I got so much out of making the movies based on real events and TV shows that I really wanted to try it. Friends encouraged me to take the leap. Brian Grazer had already worked on a couple of documentaries, one about making of Deep Throat, another one about behind the scenes look at wrestling, which is a fun movie, Beyond the Mat. And he encouraged me to give it a try. And I found I was able to, put more of myself into these projects than I ever expected I could. Mm-hmm. And it does get back to, it's all storytelling. And especially, I love post-production, always have. And of course, with a documentary, that's where you really find the film. And so it's exciting to go to the places and meet the people and be a part of all of that. But But at the end of the day, it is this kind of creative discovery, which is even, more of a high wire act, of course, with a documentary, and especially a verite documentary, which I learned. Right now, I'm working on a film about the World Central Kitchen at Chef Jose Andres, and we've been following events as around COVID and other storm activations, and we're in the early stages of that one. So there's a lot of discovery going on. But that's an inspiring group of people led by Chef Jose.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, we've got a lot of questions here and a lot of comments. Many people just writing in to say how much they love the film. John Tierney says, congratulations on a wonderful, enlightening film. Not a story about tragedy as much as one about the resilience of a town and the quality of the people. I would love to live with the good neighbors of paradise.
Yes, you would. Yes, you would.
Somebody, here's a good question from Jonathan Swartz. How has the film been used as outreach to educate people on climate change and rebuilding against all odds?
Well, NatGeo has a number of initiatives in this area. And by the way, also some charitable programs that are focused toward paradise and fire recovery and so forth, that they've aligned with the film. I've been very grateful for that and appreciative of it on behalf of everybody. And the film's just getting out there to audiences. So I mean, the conversation has always been that we, at some point, we'll just share it, but then we will definitely use it in those ways. And certainly that's NatGeo's inclination with the projects that they support. And so I think, but I do hope that it is an engrossing story. I hope it is entertaining and gripping enough that people don't feel like they're in an educational environment, and yet they're learning something about themselves and the world around them that might be informative, might be helpful as they go forward.
Yeah.
One thing that Woody says, ex-Mayor Woody, always keep your cell phone charged and always keep a full tank of gas. You never know. And a lot of people got in trouble running out of gas or their cell phone dying, and good fundamentals.
Yeah. Somebody named Rebecca Cavallari asks, was there a lot of footage left on the cutting room floor?
Well, of course, with it, yes. Well, as I said, a lot of storylines, individuals who evaporated and really left us no way of even finding them. They just one day, again, after that initial surge of, yes, I'm going to stay, yes, I'm going to rebuild, there were a lot of people that I would have bet were going to stay who left, and they didn't want anybody to follow. There was no way for us to find them. While I was editing Rebuilding Paradise, I was also in the middle of editing Hillbilly Elegy, which is an adaptation of a memoir by J.D. Vance. And it's a very different kind of drama, but a lot of the people in J.D.'s life could have been living in Paradise, California, and vice versa. And again, that's a sensibility and a type of person who I connect with. They're my family. And it was very interesting because I definitely found that the documentary work was influencing some of the editorial choices and even some added scenes and pickups and things like that I did indirectly, but not insignificantly. My doc sensibility experience with Rebuilding Paradise was definitely having a positive influence on my work on the scripted project, Hillbilly Elegy.
Wow, that's amazing. It was there's one segment of the film where you have footage of Paradise back. I don't know if it was in the 60s or 70s or maybe earlier, but that
both 50s, 60s, and 70s.
It was such a great sequence, and where somebody says, it was like this beautiful town where there were no laws. Like, really get the sense of like that libertarian ethos of the American West, and living. And it's not in today's political language, but it did make me think about, okay, these are people who come from that libertarian ethos of the West.
Yes.
With this, their attitude towards government and everything mixed in there, like just how that,
unsettling in this kind of this sort of overtly paradoxical sort of circumstance. While I didn't want to belabor that or challenge people with it, I wanted them to allow us in. They, to me, it was kind of inherent in the piece. I will say that, I was very good at launching conversations with people, but it was my experienced documentary producers behind me who would often not let the conversation end and know to keep it going in a very human way, but a probing way. And I learned a lot from Zan and Liz and others, just to not give up on the moment, take some time and keep the exploration going, until people let you know that they people will let you know when they really don't want to talk anymore.
Yeah. I thought that I'm sorry, I forget their names, but the police officer and his wife and their kid,
Matt,
that storyline was, they were open with you a lot, right? They ended up separating and I think divorcing.
They were, and they're doing well. They're doing well, thankfully. They've recovered in significant ways. But again, I think they recognized that whether they would have ever wanted that or not, that this was the truth of this kind of situation. And I think the people felt like that this was an opportunity to offer some insight and some truth. And to the extent that they could bear to do it, they really did. They really, really did. And Matt is a great guy. So is his wife. But he, as his wife said, he gave himself to the town.
Right.
And he made that choice. It was a heroic choice. He made a world of difference there. He really did. I saw it. And yet, whatever fissures or weaknesses there already were there in the relationship, as I said, it's kind of a slippery slope, just heightened everything. Yeah. I think it's what we're seeing with COVID a lot. It's if you're all the little rough spots and weak areas are suddenly, they're suddenly far more problematic and intense under this kind of stress.
I thought that was all captured, and there was one shot of him where he's in his police cruiser watching his house burn down, and you don't even linger on it. He doesn't linger. He's he turns around and he drives off because he's got to go work. That was a shocking thing I've ever seen. He had to go do his job and he left his burning home.
There were so many examples. Somebody earlier asked, did we leave things on the editing floor? We had an hour of that first person body cam and video footage, and it's all remarkable and touching.
Well, so a last question here. We're just about out of time, but at Film Independent, we're here to support emerging filmmakers, and somebody wrote in with a question. Ron, thank you so much for being here. Do you have any advice for young filmmakers?
Well, make films. More than ever, you can, and I have a grandson who's 13. He has a great sense of humor. He's making hilarious little films. It's your phone. It's your laptop. He doesn't even necessarily do it on the laptop. He does it all on the phone. And start telling stories that way and follow through, build out, make them a little more complicated. First make it play and experimentation, and then do that. And as you do that, go back and rewatch films, whether they're documentaries, whether they're scripted TV episodes that you like, and watch them again as you've begun to sort of focus on it as something that you're trying to do in a more serious way. Go back and watch the projects that moved you the most, watch them again, then watch the scenes that matter the most, but with no sound, and understand what the language of that filmmaker used, why is that coming together to reach you? And when you begin to understand what that communication is, then you can begin to have some control over it and channel that which interests you into a relationship, a conversation with an audience member.
Beautiful. I can't wait to see your grandson's work. I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, he's a lot of fun so far. Yeah.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful to talk with you. Congrats on Rebuilding Paradise. Such a powerful film. Thank you also to National Geographic for sharing the film with us, and look forward to Hillbilly Elegy next month.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hope you like it. Appreciate it.